The lecture hall fell silent as Zach Vorn walked to the front of the room. The alien moved with careful steps, his 6 limbs working together in perfect balance. His dark blue exoskeleton caught the light, showing old scars and battle damage that no amount of medical treatment could fully repair. The cadets watched with wide eyes. Most had never seen a Viridian up close before. They knew Zach Vorn by reputation, the most decorated non-human officer in the Galactic Coalition forces, hero of the Hive Mind War, and now their new combat tactics instructor. "Good morning," Zach Vorn said, his voice coming through his translator, with a slight metallic edge. "I am Commander Zach Vorn. For the next 3 months I will teach you how to survive battles that you should not be able to survive." In the back row, Cadet Sam Miller leaned toward his friend. "Look at the breathing setup he's got," he whispered. "Must be 6 separate filters." "And check out those reinforced leg joints," Lisa Rodriguez whispered back. "That's not standard Coalition gear." Zach Vorn continued his lecture, showing battle footage from the war. The cadets watched in amazement as the recording showed Zach Vorn leading a small team through impossible terrain, fighting with strength and speed that seemed beyond what his frame should allow. When the class ended, a group of senior cadets approached the commander as he gathered his teaching materials. "Sir," said Lieutenant Frank Wilson, the group's leader, "several of us are gathering at the officers' lounge this evening. We would be honored if you would join us." Zach Vorn's compound eyes shifted slightly, his species equivalent of a smile. "I accept your invitation, Lieutenant Wilson." Later that evening, Zach Vorn sat at a table surrounded by eager young officers. The lounge was comfortable by Coalition standards, with soft lighting and climate control set for the comfort of multiple species. "Commander, if I may ask," said Lieutenant Karen Davis, "your combat gear seems highly customized. Those aren't standard Coalition enhancements, are they?" Zach Vorn made a clicking sound that his translator didn't convert. The officers had come to recognize this as Viridian laughter. "They are not enhancements, Lieutenant Davis," he replied. "What you see is my natural physiology." The table fell silent. Lieutenant Wilson stared at the breathing apparatus that covered parts of Zach Vorn's face. "But sir, those breathing filters are adaptations that help me process oxygen-rich atmospheres," Zach Vorn explained. "The air on this station has roughly 3 times the oxygen content of my homeworld. Without these filters, I would suffer chemical burns in my breathing sacs." The officers exchanged looks of surprise. "And your exoskeleton?" asked Patricia Johnson, a tactical officer. "It looks reinforced beyond normal Viridian standards." "Again, this is natural," Zach Vorn said. "My homeworld has 2.8 times the gravity of Earth. My species evolved with stronger external plating to support our internal organs against the crush." Lieutenant Davis leaned forward. "Commander, what classification is your homeworld?" Zach Vorn's eyes shifted to look at each of the humans in turn before he answered. "My home is what your xenobiologists would classify as a Class 12 Deathworld." The lounge fell completely silent. Several officers at nearby tables turned to stare. Class 12 planets were considered uninhabitable by Coalition standards, worlds of extreme gravity, atmospheric toxicity, and constant environmental hazards. No known sentient species had evolved in such conditions. "But," continued Lieutenant Johnson, "our records show humans evolved on a Class 9 world, and that's considered remarkable. Earth is one of the harshest known worlds to produce advanced civilization. How could any species develop on a Class 12? Zach Vorn's breathing made a soft whistling sound as he considered his response. "We did not develop much of a civilization, by your standards," he finally said. "My people were intelligent but limited by our environment. We had no metals that could be worked with our technology level. Our atmosphere made fire nearly impossible to control. We lived in small groups, hunting and defending territory." He paused, and the officers waited for him to continue. "But we did form an alliance with a species that helped us reach the stars." Zach Vorn's compound eyes shifted in what the humans recognized as amusement. "They call themselves humans." The claim was met with obvious disbelief. "That's not possible," said Frank Wilson. First contact with Viridians was made by the Coalition scout ship Daybreak only 40 years ago. The official first contact, yes, Zach Vorn agreed. But humans found us 5 years before that. Your people have a habit of exploring where they are told not to go. He settled back in his specially reinforced chair, prepared for a long story. 50 Earth years ago, a human exploratory vessel named the FSS Horizon made an emergency landing on Verid after sustaining damage from a meteor shower. Captain Howard Clark and his crew of 15 were given up for dead by early Coalition rescue teams who deemed Verid too hostile for recovery operations. Zach Vorn's voice took on a softer tone as he continued. Our elders had been watching the sky for generations. We knew of other worlds but had no means to reach them. When the human vessel crashed in the Crimson Valley, our scouts reported it immediately. The officers around the table were now completely focused on Zach Vorn's story. Even those from other tables had moved closer to listen. The humans had survived the crash, but were rapidly dying from exposure to our world. Their protective suits could not handle our gravity or atmosphere for long. Our scouts observed them struggling to repair their vessel. What did your people do? Asked Karen Davis. We were curious about these strange visitors, Zach Vorn said. Our scouts approached cautiously. Captain Clark did something unexpected when he saw us. Instead of hiding in their vessel, he stepped outside in his failing protective suit and offered a greeting. That sounds like a human response, Lieutenant Wilson said with a small smile. Indeed. He communicated through images and simple mathematical equations displayed on his suit's external screen. Basic concepts that transcended language barriers. When we understood he meant no harm, we helped his crew. You helped them repair their ship? Patricia Johnson asked. Yes. We had never worked with metal before, but we could harvest and carry materials they needed. We could withstand conditions that would kill humans instantly. In return, they shared knowledge. They showed us stars and planets through their ship's database. They taught us about the greater galaxy. Zach Vorn paused to adjust his breathing apparatus. What was most surprising to us was learning that humans considered their own world challenging. To us, Earth sounded like paradise, low gravity, breathable atmosphere, moderate temperature ranges. Lieutenant Amy Foster spoke up for the first time. But Earth is classified as a Class 9 Deathworld. Our gravity is 1.3 times Coalition standard. Our atmospheric oxygen levels are considered toxic to most species. Zach Vorn's breathing apparatus whistled softly, his version of laughter. Lieutenant Foster, Verid's gravity is 2.8 times Earth's. Our atmosphere contains sulfur compounds that would dissolve your lungs in minutes. The safest regions on my world experience temperature variations of 120 degrees in a single-day cycle. He looked around at the officers, who seemed to be mentally recalibrating their understanding of hardship. During their 3-month stay, the humans learned that we Viridians possessed remarkable intelligence and complex social structures, but lacked the technological means to escape our brutal homeworld. What happened when they left? Asked Frank. Wilson. Captain Clark made a promise. He said he would return. Many of my people did not believe him. Zach Vorn's eyes brightened slightly. I was young then, barely an adult, but I believed. The alien war hero looked around at the gathered officers, their faces showing a mixture of awe and disbelief. 1 year later, Captain Clark returned with 3 ships and a team of scientists, not as representatives of your coalition, but as humans acting on their own initiative. They established the first permanent outpost on our world, using technology designed specifically to withstand Verid's environment. That violated so many coalition protocols, whispered Karen Davis. Yes, agreed Zach Vorn, but humans have never been good at following rules that stand in the way of doing what they believe is right. More officers had gathered now, drawn by the story. Even the bartender had stopped pretending to clean glasses and was openly listening. And that, said Zach Vorn, was just the beginning of how humans and Viridians formed the alliance that would eventually save the galaxy from the hive mind incursion. The officers' lounge had grown crowded as word spread about Zach Vorn's story. New listeners pulled chairs from nearby tables, forming a wide circle around the Viridian commander. A server brought fresh drinks, moving carefully through the gathered crowd. "Tell us more about the early days," urged Lieutenant Frank Wilson. "How did humans and Viridians start working together?" Zach Vorn took a sip from his specialized container. The liquid inside was a dark purple nutrient mix that smelled faintly of minerals. When Captain Clark returned to Earth after the emergency landing, he faced a difficult situation, Zach Vorn explained. The Coalition had strict rules about contact with developing species. Humans had only recently joined the Coalition themselves and were still proving their trustworthiness. "So he went around the rules," said Karen Davis with a knowing smile. "Yes. He gathered private funding from wealthy human supporters who believed in exploration. They created a company called Frontier Scientific Solutions that officially studied extreme environments. In reality, they built the first human Viridian outpost." Lieutenant Amy Foster leaned forward. "But how did they hide an entire outpost from Coalition inspectors?" "Space traffic is monitored. Verid sits at the edge of a dust cloud that interferes with standard sensors," Zach Vorn replied. "The humans chose their approach vectors carefully. And remember, no one wanted to go to Verid. Why would anyone visit a Class 12 Deathworld without good reason?" The Viridian shifted his weight, adjusting to the chair designed for different body types. The first permanent structure was built in a deep canyon that shielded it from orbital scans. 20 humans lived there, rotating on 6-month shifts. They wore specially designed environment suits whenever they went outside. "And your people?" asked Patricia Johnson. "How did they react to this secret base?" "At first, with suspicion. Only my family group helped the humans regularly. But Captain Clark was smart. He did not offer us advanced technology immediately. Instead, he started with simple tools: better cutting implements, basic medical supplies, water purification." Zach Vorn made the clicking sound that served as Viridian laughter. The first major breakthrough came when Clark's team created a modified breathing apparatus for Viridians. It allowed us to work comfortably in their base without suffering from the filtered air. Suddenly, we could spend hours learning from them. The gathered officers listened intently as Zach Vorn described how the humans taught selected Viridians to read, write, and understand basic science. In exchange, the Viridians showed humans how to navigate Verid's deadly terrain and extract rare minerals from its crust. Within 3 years, the original outpost had grown to include 5 buildings and a landing pad, Zach Vorn continued. 50 Viridians worked with the humans daily. We learned faster than they expected. Our minds were already adapted to solve complex problems. We needed to be clever to survive our world. But the Coalition found out eventually, said Frank Wilson. They must have. Yes, in the 4th year. A Coalition patrol ship detected unusual energy signatures from our world. They investigated and discovered the human operation. Captain Clark was arrested for violating first contact protocols. A murmur ran through the gathered officers. Breaking Coalition contact laws could result in severe penalties, including permanent exile from Coalition space. "What happened to him?" asked Karen Davis. "The humans have a saying. It is easier to ask forgiveness than permission." Clark had prepared for discovery. When Coalition officials arrived, they expected to find primitive aliens being exploited. Instead, they found Viridians operating communication equipment, reading Coalition standard language, and working as equals alongside humans. Zach Vorn's compound eyes shifted to what the humans recognized as an expression of pride. "I was chosen to speak to the officials. I had learned human English and Coalition standard language best among my people. I told them we had invited the humans to stay, that we had given permission for the outpost." "Did they believe you?" asked Amy Foster. "They had no choice. Coalition law respects the sovereignty of all intelligent species, even pre-spaceflight. By claiming we had invited humans to our world, we created a legal exception to the contact protocols." Frank Wilson shook his head in admiration. "Captain Clark planned that from the beginning, didn't he?" "Of course. Humans are surprisingly clever for species from a mere Class 9 world." This brought laughter from the gathered officers. Zach Vorn waited for it to subside before continuing. "The Coalition had 2 options. Acknowledge the human-Viridian relationship or forcibly separate us, which would violate their own founding principles. They chose a compromise. The outpost was officially recognized, but placed under coalition oversight. Captain Clark received a formal reprimand instead of punishment. That must have been when official first contact was recorded, said Patricia Johnson. Yes. But by then we had already been working with humans for nearly 5 years. My people had learned enough to begin our own technological development. We were no longer isolated on our deadly world. Zach Vorn paused, his breathing apparatus making a soft whistling sound as it processed the station's air. What the Coalition did not understand initially was the natural compatibility between humans and Viridians, he continued. Both our species evolved on hostile worlds, though in different ways. Both developed problem-solving approaches based on survival. When we combined our perspectives, we created solutions neither would have found alone. A new officer pushed through the crowd. Captain Eric Ross was older than most of the others, with gray hair and the confident stance of a veteran. I remember the first joint human-Viridian engineering project, Ross said. A mining system for extracting rare elements from high-pressure environments. It revolutionized resource collection throughout Coalition space. Zach Vorn nodded in recognition. The pressure adaptive drilling system. Humans provided the theoretical framework, while Viridians designed components that could withstand extreme conditions. It was the first of many collaborative innovations. But how did you go from mining engineers to soldiers? Asked Lieutenant Wilson. Your combat record shows you fought in the Hive Mind War 10 years after first contact. Zach Vorn's eyes darkened slightly, a Viridian expression of seriousness. That transition began with a demonstration. The Coalition was still uncertain about allowing Viridians to join as full members. Some officials argued that despite our intelligence, we were too physically different to integrate with other species. I've heard rumors about this demonstration, said Captain Ross. Something about the Special Forces qualification course? Yes. A joint human-Viridian team requested permission to attempt the Coalition's Special Forces qualification course. A test no single species had ever completed without specialized equipment. The officers leaned forward in anticipation. The Coalition Special Forces course was legendary for its difficulty. It tested physical endurance, tactical thinking, and adaptation to hostile environments. Even with advanced gear, the failure rate was over 80%. 8 of us participated, 4 humans and 4 Viridians, Zach Vorn continued. We were allowed only basic equipment. No powered assistance, no advanced weapons. And you completed it? Asked Karen Davis. In record time, Zach Vorn replied simply. Humans provided endurance and creative problem-solving. We contributed strength and resilience to extreme conditions. Together, we demonstrated something the Coalition had never considered. Species from Deathworlds, working in concert, could achieve results beyond what any single species could accomplish. Captain Ross nodded. I remember the uproar in the Coalition military command. It changed our entire approach to special operations. Yes. Within months, the first official human-Viridian joint strike teams were formed. We were still training when the Hive Mind launched its first attacks on Coalition space. Zach Vorn looked around at the gathered officers, their faces showing a mixture of awe and anticipation. And that, he said, is how we found ourselves thrust into a war that would test whether our unlikely alliance could save the Coalition itself. The officers' lounge had grown even more crowded. Word had spread throughout the station that Commander Zach Vorn was sharing his war stories. Junior officers stood along the walls, while senior staff had claimed the few remaining seats. Someone had brought in extra chairs from nearby rooms. Even the Academy Commandant, General Laura Phillips, had arrived discreetly and taken a seat at the back of the room. Her presence went unnoticed by most, but Zach Vorn's compound eyes had spotted her immediately. The Hive Mind, Zach Vorn continued, was unlike any enemy the Coalition had faced before. They evolved on a Class 10 world with extremely high metal content in the soil and water. Their biology incorporated living metal, making them naturally armored against conventional weapons. I've seen images, said Lieutenant Frank Wilson. They looked like insects with metal exoskeletons. That is a reasonable comparison, Zach Vorn agreed. Though they were not insects as you understand them, They shared a collective consciousness. Each individual was connected to the others through a form of natural quantum entanglement. They could share information instantly across vast distances. Karen Davis leaned forward. Is it true they had no concept of individual death? Correct. To them, losing a body was like you losing a fingernail. The consciousness remained in the hive. This made them fearless in battle and immune to psychological warfare. Captain Eric Ross added, the first coalition forces to encounter them suffered terrible losses. Standard tactics were useless, Zach Vorn nodded. The Coalition Council was desperate for solutions when they reluctantly approved deployment of the Human Viridian Joint Strike Teams. We had completed only basic training. What was intended as a field test became the hive mind's first defeat. The Ottawa Viridian's voice took on a softer tone as he continued. I commanded Strike Team Obsidian, 4 Viridians, including myself, and 4 humans. Our insertion vessel was piloted by Commander Olivia Bennett, a human female with extraordinary skill in navigating gravitational distortions. What was your first mission? Asked a young officer from the back of the room. We were sent to the Proxima system. The hive mind had established a processing facility on a volcanic moon to extract rare minerals. Our mission was to infiltrate the facility and gather intelligence on their communication networks. Zach Vorn paused, his breathing apparatus making a soft whistling sound as it processed the station's air. The facility's ambient temperature was 150 degrees Celsius. The atmosphere was mostly methane and carbon monoxide. Coalition forces couldn't operate there, even with their best environmental suits. But humans couldn't survive those conditions. Either, could they? Asked a junior officer. No, Zach Vorn agreed. But they didn't need to. This was where our partnership proved its value. The humans monitored operations from orbital position, using neural links to provide tactical analysis and coordinate our movements. Meanwhile, Viridians operated on the ground without environmental protection. Without protection, gasped Karen Davis. Those conditions were uncomfortable but manageable compared to parts of our homeworld, Zach Vorn explained. Remember, Verid regularly experiences temperatures that would melt standard coalition equipment. Our bodies evolved to withstand extreme heat, pressure, and toxic atmospheres. Captain Ross whistled in appreciation. So the humans provided the strategic oversight while the Viridians executed the ground mission. Perfect combination. Yes, we infiltrated the facility while the humans guided us through its layout, which they mapped using specialized scanning equipment from orbit. They identified blind spots in the hive mind's security systems that we could exploit. Zach Vorn described how his team moved through the facility, collecting data on hive mind operations and communications. The humans analyzed this information in real time, gradually building an understanding of how the collective consciousness operated. The critical discovery came when Commander Bennett noticed a pattern in the hive mind's neural activity. Zach Vorn continued. Their communication network operated on specific frequencies that changed in predictable patterns. She realized that these frequencies were vulnerable to disruption. Like jamming a radio signal? Asked Patricia Johnson. Similar, but more fundamental. Humans had developed deep space communication technology that used quantum frequency shifts to transmit information. Commander Bennett recognized that a modified version of this technology could interfere with the hive mind's ability to share consciousness across its units. Zach Vorn's compound eyes brightened, his species equivalent of excitement. With this insight, we not only completed our mission, but identified the first real weakness in hive mind biology. My team extracted, with all our data, and returned to Coalition space. What happened next? Asked Frank Wilson. Coalition scientists worked with human and Viridian engineers to develop what they called a neural disruptor, a device that could generate the specific frequency patterns needed to interfere with hive mind communication. Zach Vorn shifted in, his seat, his exoskeleton making a slight scraping sound against the reinforced chair. Within 2 months, we had a working prototype. Within 6 months, 40 joint strike teams were operational, each equipped with smaller versions of the disruptor. Within a year, the hive mind was retreating on all fronts. Captain Ross nodded. I remember the reports. The hive mind units became disorganized when cut off from the collective. They could still fight, but without their perfect coordination. Yes. For the first time, they experienced something like fear. Their units began to retreat rather than fight to the death. It was a fundamental shift in the war. A young cadet raised her hand hesitantly. "Sir, if I may ask, what was it like to work so closely with humans? Were there challenges in communication or coordination?" Zakvorn made his clicking sound of amusement. "Many challenges. Humans and Viridians perceive the world differently. Our sensory organs detect different wavelengths of light, different frequencies of sound. Our brains process information in different ways." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "But these differences became our greatest strength. Humans would notice things Viridians missed, and vice versa. Where a Viridian might see a straightforward solution requiring brute force, a human might devise a clever alternative using minimal resources. Where humans might hesitate because of perceived danger, Viridians could assess that the threat was manageable." Lieutenant Amy Foster spoke up. "It sounds like the perfect partnership." "Not perfect," Zakvorn corrected, "but complementary. We needed each other's perspectives and abilities. Neither species could have defeated the hive mind alone." The room fell silent as the officers considered this. General Phillips, still unnoticed in the back, nodded slightly in agreement. "Strike Team Obsidian completed 17 critical missions during the war," Zakvorn continued, "each more challenging than the last. As the hive mind adapted to our tactics, we were forced to innovate constantly." "Were there losses?" asked Karen. Davis quietly, Zakvorn's eyes dimmed, a sign of sadness in his species. "Yes. By the end of the war, only 26 of the original 40 joint strike teams remained operational. My team lost 2 members, 1 human and 1 Viridian, during a mission to a hive mind supply base. They died saving each other." He looked around the room, his gaze touching on each officer briefly. That was when the Coalition truly understood what we had created. Human and Viridian soldiers were willing to sacrifice themselves not just for their own kind, but for each other. The bonds formed between our species transcended biological differences. Captain Ross raised his glass in a silent toast. Others followed his example. "The war reached its turning point during the Battle of Sigma Centauri," Zakvorn said. "The hive mind had gathered its remaining forces to make a final stand. The Coalition assembled every available ship and soldier for what everyone expected would be the costliest engagement of the conflict." His voice lowered slightly as he continued. "It was there that Strike Team Obsidian received its final and most dangerous mission, to deliver a neural disruptor directly to the hive mind's central nexus, a mission that would change the course of the war and reveal the true meaning of our alliance." The officers' lounge had fallen completely silent. All eyes were fixed on Zakvorn as he prepared to describe the final mission to the hive mind's central nexus. Even the servers had stopped their work to listen. General Laura Phillips moved from her spot at the back of the room, making her way through the crowd. Officers quickly stood at attention, but she waved them back to their seats. "At ease," she said. "I'm just here to listen like everyone else." She turned to Zakvorn. "Commander, please continue. I was on the Coalition Council when we approved this mission. I'd like to hear your perspective." Zakvorn acknowledged her with a respectful gesture. "General Phillips, I remember you were one of the few who supported our plan. It was the only option we had left," she replied simply, taking a seat near the front. Zakvorn nodded and continued his story. The Battle of Sigma Centauri was in its 3rd day. Coalition forces were holding their own, but just barely. The hive mind had gathered nearly 80% of its remaining forces for this engagement. Our military analysts believed that if we could strike at the central nexus, we might end the war in a single action. "What exactly was the central nexus?" asked Lieutenant Frank Wilson. "The physical location where the hive mind consciousness was most concentrated," Zakvorn explained. "Not its only location. The consciousness existed throughout all hive mind units, but the point from which it coordinated its vast network. Our scientists believed that disrupting this nexus would cause a cascading failure throughout the entire hive mind. But reaching it seemed impossible," added General Phillips. It was located at the center of the hive mind fleet, protected by their strongest defenses. Yes, agreed Zach Vorn. A conventional attack would have failed. But Strike Team, Obsidian had a different approach. He described how his team proposed using a small, stealthy vessel designed by human and Viridian engineers. The ship would appear to be a damaged hive mind craft, drifting through the battle toward the central Nexus ship. Commander Bennett would pilot the vessel, Zach Vorn said. She had studied hive mind flight patterns and could mimic their movements perfectly. The rest of us would remain in stasis pods to minimize life signs that might be detected. Stasis pods on such a small vessel? Asked Karen Davis. Wouldn't that be detected? Not with the modifications we made, Zach Vorn replied. Human engineers had developed a method to mask energy signatures, while Viridian materials science created shielding that appeared identical to hive mind hull plating when scanned. Captain Eric Ross nodded appreciatively. Combined innovation at its finest. The mission was approved, though many believed it was a suicide run, Zach Vorn continued. We launched during the heaviest fighting of the battle, when the hive mind was fully engaged with coalition forces. Zach Vorn's compound eyes dimmed slightly as he recalled the mission. Commander Bennett piloted us through the chaos of battle with remarkable skill. Damaged ships, weapons fire, and debris surrounded us on all sides. Twice we were nearly destroyed by stray shots from coalition vessels who couldn't distinguish us from enemy craft. The officers listened intently as Zach Vorn described their tense journey through the heart of the hive mind fleet. After 3 hours of careful maneuvering, they approached the massive central Nexus ship. It was unlike any vessel we had encountered before, Zach Vorn said. Not built, but grown. A living ship nearly 20 kilometers in length, with no clear entry points or weak spots. Our plan had been to attach to its outer hull and cut our way inside, but we realized immediately that would not work. What did you do? Asked a young cadet from the back. Commander Bennett identified what appeared to be intake ports, openings, where the living ship processed matter and energy from space. She calculated we could pass through one without being crushed, though it would likely destroy our vessel. That sounds incredibly risky, said Lieutenant Amy Foster. It was our only option, Zach Vorn replied simply. We ejected an individual, pods designed to withstand the pressure, while our ship was torn apart in the intake system. The process distributed us throughout different sections of the Nexus. Zach Vorn's breathing apparatus made a soft whistling sound as he continued. We had planned to regroup and place the neural disruptor at the ship's core, but we were separated, and communications were nearly impossible inside the living vessel. Its tissues blocked our signals. Each of us had to navigate alone through a maze of organic corridors filled with hive mind workers. He described how the team members used their training to move undetected, using the ship's own biological systems as cover. The Viridians could withstand the harsh internal environment of the Nexus, while the humans used their adaptive thinking to find paths through the constantly changing structure. After 6 hours, 3 of us managed to reach the core area, Zach Vorn said. Myself, Commander Bennett, and Dr. Alan White, our technology specialist. We still had the neural disruptor but discovered a critical problem. It had been damaged during our entry to the Nexus. The room remained completely silent as Zach Vorn continued. Dr. White examined the device and determined it could still function, but would require direct neural input to calibrate the disruption frequencies. Someone would need to connect directly to it, using their own nervous system to guide the disruption pattern. That sounds fatal, said Karen Davis quietly. The connection would likely be fatal for any species, confirmed Zach Vorn. But someone had to do it. Commander Bennett immediately volunteered. Zach Vorn's eyes dimmed again, a clear sign of emotion for his species. I refused to allow it. Viridian nervous systems are more compatible with the technology, offering a higher chance of success. As team commander, I overrode her objection and connected myself to the device. General Phillips spoke softly. The report stated that you expected to die. Yes, Zach Vorn agreed. I believed the connection would destroy my mind while allowing the disruptor to function. I accepted this outcome as necessary to end the war. Frank, Wilson leaned forward. But you survived. Something unexpected happened, Zachvorn said. When I connected to the device, it created a bridge between my consciousness and the hive mind itself. The neural disruptor didn't simply jam their communications, it established contact. The officers exchanged surprised glances. For the first time, the hive mind encountered a consciousness evolved to withstand conditions more extreme than its own. My mind, shaped by the brutal environment of Verid, could process and adapt to the overwhelming flood of hive mind thoughts. You communicated with it? Asked Captain Ross in disbelief. Yes. Not with words, but through concepts and sensations. I showed it memories of Verid, of human worlds, of the diverse species of the Coalition. I showed it cooperation instead of consumption, alternative paths to survival that didn't require conquest. Zachvorn paused, seeming to search for the right words. The hive mind had never encountered thinking this way before. It had evolved in isolation, seeing all other life as either threat or resource. Through me, it experienced the concept of mutual benefit for the first time. And it understood? Asked General Phillips. Not immediately. But it recognized something fundamental, that there were forms of intelligence that could withstand environments it considered lethal, that there were strategies for survival it had never considered. This intrigued it. Zachvorn's eyes brightened slightly. After what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes, I felt the hive mind withdraw, not in fear or defeat, but in consideration. Throughout the fleet, their ships began to disengage from battle. The attack simply stopped. The ceasefire, murmured Captain Ross. I remember that moment. We thought it was a trap at first. It was the beginning of communication, said Zachvorn. The hive mind requested time to process what it had learned. The Coalition, equally surprised, agreed to a temporary ceasefire that eventually became the peace agreement we have today. General Phillips nodded. And that's why you received the Coalition's highest honor. You didn't just help win the war. You found a path to peace that no one thought possible. Zachvorn made his clicking sound of modest acknowledgement. I was simply the bridge. The true achievement was the partnership between humans and Viridians that made it possible. Without both our perspectives working together, we would have only seen the hive mind as an enemy to destroy, never as a consciousness we could reach. As the night grew late, the crowd in the officers' lounge had thinned slightly, but those who remained were fully captivated by Zachvorn's story. The Viridian commander's voice had grown more thoughtful, almost philosophical, as he reflected on the larger meaning of the events he had described. The peace with the hive mind has lasted for 7 years now, said General Phillips. Many in the Coalition still don't understand how it happened. Because they think in old patterns, Zachvorn replied. For thousands of years, the Coalition believed that intelligence evolved most effectively on worlds with abundant resources and minimal environmental threats. Species from gentle worlds had more time to develop art, philosophy, and science instead of focusing on mere survival. Gestured to his exoskeleton. My people evolved these natural defenses because our world tried to crush us every day. Humans developed their remarkable endurance and problem-solving abilities because Earth constantly presented new threats. The hive mind evolved its collective consciousness because individual survival was nearly impossible on their metal-rich world. Lieutenant Frank Wilson nodded slowly. So the harshest worlds produced the most adaptable species. Yes. What the Coalition never considered was that hardship itself could be valuable, that the struggle to survive creates unique perspectives and abilities that cannot develop in comfortable environments. Karen Davis looked thoughtful. Is that why you decided to teach at the academy? To share that perspective? Partly, admitted Zachvorn. After the war, I could have returned to Verid or taken various diplomatic posts, but I believed the most important lesson from our success had not been fully learned. Zachvorn shifted his weight, his exoskeleton making a slight scraping sound against the reinforced chair. Before the Human-Viridian Alliance, the Coalition classified species from high gravity, high radiation, or otherwise dangerous worlds as potentially hazardous. The assumption was that any intelligence evolving in hostile conditions would develop aggressive tendencies. General Phillips nodded. I remember those classifications well. Humans were initially labeled as potentially hazardous when we first contacted the Coalition. Yet humans proved to be among the most cooperative species, said Zach Vorn. You formed alliances, built consensus, worked toward mutual benefit. These traits evolved precisely because your world was dangerous enough that individuals needed to work together to survive. A young cadet named Daniel Green, who had been listening quietly, raised his hand. Professor Zach Vorn, after your contact with the hive mind, did you experience any lasting effects? The room fell silent again. It was a question many had wondered, but few had dared to ask. Zach Vorn's breathing slowed noticeably before he responded. Yes. The connection changed me. For several months after the incident, I experienced echoes, fragments of hive mind consciousness that lingered in my mind. Dreams of stars seen through thousands of eyes simultaneously, memories that were not my own. Was it dangerous? Asked Amy Foster. More confusing than dangerous, Zach Vorn replied. The hive mind consciousness is so different from individual awareness that my brain struggled to process the experience. Coalition medical teams monitored me closely, concerned that some part of the hive mind might have transferred to me permanently. And did it? Asked Frank Wilson. Not in the way they feared. I retained no control link to hive mind units, no ability to communicate with their network, but I gained something else. A deeper understanding of collective consciousness, the awareness that intelligence can exist in forms vastly different from our own. General Phillips leaned forward. That understanding has been invaluable in our ongoing diplomatic relations with the hive mind. Your insights helped establish the communication protocols we use today. Zach Vorn made his clicking sound of modest acknowledgement. The experience also changed how I view the Coalition itself, he continued. We are, in our own way, a type of collective consciousness. Different species with different evolutionary histories, coming together to create something greater than any could achieve alone. The room was quiet as the officers considered this perspective. After my recovery, Zach Vorn said, I requested assignment to the Academy. I wanted to share not just tactical knowledge, but this broader understanding that diversity of experience creates strength, that the harshest worlds often produce the most valuable perspectives. Daniel Green spoke again. Is that why the Coalition has changed its recruitment policies? General Phillips answered before Zach Vorn could respond. Yes. After the war, we reviewed our classification system and recruitment strategies. We had been overlooking potential allies simply because they evolved in conditions we considered too extreme. The Coalition now actively recruits from Class 8 and higher worlds, Zach Vorn added. Deathworld species make up only 2% of known sentient life, but contribute nearly 30% of our most effective military and scientific personnel. He looked around the room, his compound eyes taking in each officer. Look at this gathering. 20 years ago, a Viridian would never have been allowed to teach at this academy. The Coalition would have considered my physiology too alien, my homeworld too extreme to produce a mind compatible with standard Coalition thinking. And now you're one of our most decorated veterans, said Karen Davis. As are many from worlds once dismissed as too harsh for advanced civilization, Zach Vorn replied. Humans led the way in this change of thinking. Your species has a remarkable ability to recognize potential allies where others see only strangeness. General Phillips stood up and addressed the room. It's getting late, and Commander Zach Vorn has classes to teach tomorrow. I suggest we conclude. For the evening, the officers began to disperse, many stopping to thank Zach Vorn personally before leaving. Soon, only the General, Zach Vorn, and a few senior officers remained. Phillips approached Zach Vorn privately. That was quite a story session, Commander. You've given these young officers a lot to think about. I hope so, General. They are the future of the Coalition. Phillips lowered her voice. The new Joint Training Initiative begins next month. 20 species from worlds Class 7 and higher. The Council is calling it the Deathworlder Program. Zach Vorn's compound eyes brightened noticeably. Commander Bennett would be proud. She always said the galaxy's harshest worlds produced its greatest defenders. She was right, General Phillips replied. And now, thanks to your stories, a new generation understands why. The general paused, then added, The hive mind has requested to send observers to the program. Their first official participation in coalition military training. A significant step, Zach Vorn said. Have they selected their representatives? Yes, and they've specifically asked that you be involved in their orientation. It seems your connection left an impression on them as well. Zach Vorn made a soft whistling sound, his version of thoughtful consideration. The universe is full of wonders, General Phillips. Sentient metal hives, silicon-based life forms, gaseous intelligences. But the greatest wonder I've found is how beings from worlds that tried to kill them every day can become the strongest advocates for peace, because they understand the true cost of survival, Phillips said. Exactly. Those who fight the hardest to live often value life the most deeply. Zach Vorn rose from his chair, towering slightly over the human general. The future of the coalition lies not in comfortable worlds, but in the combined wisdom of those who had to struggle for every advantage. As they walked toward the exit, the Viridian commander looked back at the now empty lounge. Tomorrow's class will be on adaptive tactical thinking in hostile environments, he said. I think the cadets will be especially attentive after tonight's stories. I'm sure they will, agreed General Phillips. You've given them something textbooks never could. A first-hand understanding of why we're stronger together than apart. The ultimate lesson of Deathworlders, said Zach Vorn as they stepped into the corridor. Survival is not about being the strongest alone, but about finding strength together.